Hey, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Leadership Tales podcast. Joined today by amazing lady, Lori Michelle Leavitt. She's the author of the book, Pivot to Clarity, and also The Pivot, which is the first book. What you're going to hear today is a discussion about this concept of the pivots and the work that you need to do to make those pivots. And a lot of the times I in the past have seen pivot as an agile moment where you just pivot and you switch. But actually for most organizations, that pivot is significant, takes a while to do. And we'll talk today about some of the questions you need to answer as a leader, some of the skills and the mindsets you need to hold as you're going into there. For example, curiosity and coaching we're going to talk about today. But for me, this is one of these significant pieces, as she says. I think there's 5 or 6 books that she's writing that are smaller pieces of that puzzle that gets you from pivoting to clarity. And therefore, this is the first of the conversations that we could have with Lori around that. So looking forward to hearing what you think about it. Enjoy. So talk to me just what you're saying about you see it differently to other people on the pivoting. Let's just start with that. I'd love to dig into that a bit. Yeah.
So the idea for this came to me in probably about late 2013 when I had been through a number of pivots. That's not long after my final kind of big personal pivot. And I worked a lot in entrepreneurial circles where pivot is used as something that's really quick. Mm-hmm. We're going to change we're going to change our strategy. We're going to change our market. We're going to change this and that. And perhaps if you have a very tight, maybe it's just you or you have a very small leadership team, you could certainly start doing some of those things that are different than what you were doing before. However, pivot is a significant change. That is what we mean when we say it. And so it is doing a disservice to organizations around the world and even people to think, oh, if I just decide I'm going to make this change, it should happen tomorrow. And then they give up too soon. Right. The other thing that happens is leaders don't do the legwork to prepare people to be ready to change. And that is what I teach. So again, even for yourself, get in the mode where you are always ready that you're orchestrating your ability and your organization's ability to always change so that you are not the one, as a leader in an organization, you're not the one commanding, oh, now we're changing and expecting everybody to fall in line.
Yep.
It just becomes natural there. And so that is what I work with leaders mostly on, is how do you lead this culture that can always be ready to change when something happens. And guess what? Something's always happening.
I love that concept because for me, one of the other concepts I hold regularly is anti-fragile from Nassim Nicholas Taleb about, we can't predict the future. So how do we get ready for whatever we're going to, being all prepared for your spontaneity session is how I sometimes call it in there.
Right. Another one is Michelle Wooker, who wrote Gray Rhino, and her concept is similar in that it is what happens that we actually know and we're ignoring it. It's this big rhino coming at us. We see it and we just, for some reason, think, we can get across that, or we don't, we're better than that, or we're outside of that. And that it hits us. Maybe like our government and the pandemic, or
yeah,
there are. I'm sure you could look back and there are many instances. I know I did it when before my personal pivot. I might still do it some, in that I was attracting people that were not the right people around me when I first stepped into entrepreneurial, and it took me 10 years to figure out. It took me about 9 years to be aware, or 8.5 years to be aware, 1.5 years to circle through it and go, oh my goodness, what's going on? But I felt, okay, this person is not a good person to be around. They really shouldn't have been trusted. And yet I felt I was such a wonderful model of integrity that, oh, won't they just see how I am and they will change?
Yeah.
Or I am so good at what I do that it doesn't matter that they aren't going to do what they say they're going to do because I can push through it anyway. And those were two very, for my businesses at the time, fatal mistakes.
So let's go back to the beginning, because we've started, and I'd love to still dig in deeper into that, because I was reading a post on LinkedIn the other day, which just hit me between the eyes, which is a lot of the times either we believe by our power of will that we will take people with us, but we don't do the hard yards. Let's go back to the Ted Lasso comment. You don't do the hard yards of coaching the individual, the person, bringing the human being, and working out whether that's the right human being to be in the business with you. So tell us your story, Lori. Take us back.
So I call myself the pivot catalyst. And what I was describing to you is one of my personal pivots. So I realized that throughout my professional career, and probably even before, I've been through a number of pivots. And, what do we do when we've learned a lot of hard knocks, a lot of successes? And, if we're the kind of person who's drawn by purpose and trying to understand our gifts to the world, when you have a gift of knowledge like that, how can you not share it? And thus I am the pivot catalyst. Throughout my career, I have been, back then it was primarily decision support, and I still do a lot of that. But what are you doing when you're in the role of decision support within an organization or even leading an organization? You are the person that is leading significant change or influencing that significant change, providing the information and the advice and guidance that the decision makers need to make. And I helped many organizations, many leaders move through significant change, and many were considered pivots, whether they were new markets, organizational change drawn on by moving through technology. I'm going to date myself.
Yeah.
Those were really changes when I was working with the healthcare industry and moving through HIPAA privacy and security, how people communicated with each other. Organizational changes that are how they're being with each other, similar to what Satya Nadella did with Microsoft, moving from competitive to collaborative. I mean, that's huge. That doesn't happen right away. So helping with those, and that is what I still do. That is, one of my gifts. And I had to go through, just like anyone with a strategic plan, I had to go through and determine what are the major milestones I need to do in my life to really do this in a big way. And one of them was I had the wrong circle of influence around me. There were some people in it that were fabulous, and they're still in it. And there's some people in it that were not good influences. And I tell you, Colin, that is a very difficult pivot to make.
Yeah. Tell me a few of those, just to come into. I'd love to get into a bit of the detail. And it sounds gossipy, so I don't want it to come across as gossipy, but I'm always fascinated. I was doing my, I was saying this morning, doing my saboteurs assessment. And that they talk about your 9 saboteurs and how the voices get in your head. But it's useful sometimes just to talk through what are the voices of those bad influences, or maybe not bad influences, but just the wrong influences, the wrong time in your life, and what they're saying to you.
2 themes. So this is going to speak to all genders, or even those who don't relate to a gender. One is that I was attracting, I'm going to say, narcissistic type entrepreneurs. Many of them are, unfortunately. Yeah. That somehow, as we went through this journey, they felt something about me and decided that I should be part of the deal. I should be part of the partnership. Yeah. And this happens to a lot of females. Happened to me over 50. You wouldn't expect it would still happen over 50. And I actually hadn't experienced it before. I wasn't noticing it. All I was noticing that I was being pulled down. I even had to stop a business because my lead engineer was just too, he was stalking me, basically. He just was way too attached. And you just think that you could push through it. And so that was when I realized, well, one, things like this kept happening. The other one was the ego in me. You have to have that courage. You have to be able to be comfortable with being uncomfortable if you're an entrepreneur. So I have that. And it would go beyond logic to, oh, well, I can do it anyway. I can do it in spite of this. And so both of those really caught me up. And here was the awareness I had to come to. It's not them, it's me. I mean, yes, it was them, but I was part of all of those stories. And therefore, what was I doing? How was I being that was allowing that to happen at all and allowing that to continue? And so I put myself through, ended up being an 18-month journey and switched around probably 80% of my inner circle.
Interesting. Inner circle is always an interesting word for me because I've got a few colleagues who use "you're in my inner circle." And, for me, it's a very personal decision what you call an inner circle or an outer circle or a mid-circle. Or, you're close to the inner circle, but you're outside. So how do you define your inner circle for me?
Yes. And now I see the circles and I can visually go, oh, that person's outside.
Yeah.
Just consider yourself taking a mug and moving it out to a different circle. And like, all right, especially if they're family. Okay, they're still in my life, but they're sitting outside this inner circle. And really, I see that as the level of influence they have over your day-to-day decisions.
Yeah. It's interesting. Somebody once gave me the expression relationships with a purpose, and everybody said, oh, that's very clinical. So even for the daughters, relationships personally, but there is something about being conscious about how much energy we've got for those and whether it's feeding the right energy into us. So it's a tough thing to say no, as my friend Leanne Davey would say. Tough to say no, but she specializes in it. So yeah, it's interesting.
And here's the trick to it. It has a long tail. So if you have a person you really have struggled with and now they're outside your circle, and yet for some reason you're keeping them inside your circle energetically by continuing to dwell on what happened, what they did, what they said, what you gave up, what you lost, what you missed. Yeah. And that keeps them close. That might have been even harder, letting go the story. Harder than the saying, I'm not going to see them as much. Yeah. Holding someone energetically.
It's fascinating to me as an entrepreneur because, ego is the enemy. I'm a big fan of the Stoics and Ryan Holiday, and ego is the enemy. So I am so aware about, also being a Scottish Presbyterian, ego is not supposed to be part of your life. Anything good happens, something bad happens, all of those things that go in there. But it's very difficult to let the influence of the ego come into there. Because even within business partners, where there's a critical person, it's almost, can I do this by myself? Yeah, without it. And you talked about decision support, which is an interesting one because it's almost feeding that persona of going, I need support to make these decisions. How do I get that? But not being too dependent on it so that you can be yourself in what you do. So talk to me a bit about that.
And learning who to ask advice for. Yeah. So even if they're in your inner circle, like my parents, I grew up very trusting. I mean, this is a good trait, right? So they'll, as you go through a journey, if any of you listening feel like, oh, I need to go through a journey of personal change, there will be, those in your life that or traits that you have that you want to keep. I did not want to become. Colin, have you been around some female executives that have risen and somehow taken on some persona that's really hard?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we do that as a protection, a way of protection, or perceiving that that's what we have to do to shed whatever happens to us when we are our authentic selves. And I was not willing to do that. Being trusting is good. How on earth can I be a good coach if I do not trust people first? And then, take that time to learn, okay, have they proven themselves trustworthy? But I don't have time before then to decide that. Staying kind, staying empathetic. I mean, these are things that I did not want to shed. And so when I was asking for advice for one thing, so my folks are like this too, which is a wonderful upbringing. But I'm asking them for advice. They're not too far from me. They're about a 4.5-hour drive, but across a mountain pass. And my mother just recently passed away. So it's just my father now. And he's 90, but I think he's going to live for another 10 years, maybe more. Very healthy stock.
Nice.
Thank you for asking. And I remember I had someone who was changing the deal at the table. I hate that. You've negotiated an agreement and they're coming to you and they're changing the deal at the table. I know better. I have advised many leaders. It's so different when you're making the decision for yourself. And so I'm asking my parents, they're like, well, did you commit? And did you, it's just all this nicey stuff. And they were the wrong people to ask. So you can love them, but choose your advisors wisely.
Yeah.
Things like that are one of the things that helped me or drove me to start leadership peer groups. Because I know I am not alone in this.
Yeah.
It is hard to know who to trust to help you make decisions. You need a safe place.
Yeah.
And the people that you trust in some walks of your life aren't going to be the best advisors.
And even it's a difficult one because there's this piece about not listening in your own echo chamber. So there's one is, I like this person, therefore I'm inviting them in. Then you're thinking, okay, so why am I liking this? Is it because they are similar to me? And then there's a diversity of background, skills. I've got my advisory board and I've got 3 people, very different people in there deliberately. But I still question why I would invite them in for that. But then there's this piece about when I'm, to your point earlier about trust, do I trust to open up to, particularly if they're not paid and you haven't signed an NDA and you're just sharing what's going on. It's a difficult relationship. Yeah.
Yes, that seeking out diversity, again, causes you to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. And what saves you is curiosity, which is one thing that I see in you, Colin, that I so appreciate. And just to everyone listening, it will save you in so many ways. You, a leader or whomever, you're working with someone else. If you can stay in curiosity, you can keep yourself from crying. You can keep yourself from being angry. You can keep the other person in the conversation. You can learn something that you truly didn't know because you don't know it all. Guess what?
Yeah.
Curiosity is just a wonderful trait, and you have to be uncomfortable with not knowing, or even be uncomfortable with giving them the perception that you don't know.
Yeah.
Even if you do know. And, you're holding yourself out as being curious.
I love this because there's a piece, and again, we could go so many different directions in this, Laura. So, but there is something about when we teach people how to have a point of view. One of the core things is when you know something, and that some of the RAF groups, as I call them, that I've got involved with, somebody's come on, they have this, well, I know all about ChatGPT, for example, that's come up and everybody's talking about it. well, I'm teaching everybody and we could get in a call and I could pass this on. I literally go, no, yeah, because of the way it's delivered. However, if they've got a point of view, which is I'm wrestling with three personas here, the CEO who doesn't understand all the technology, and I'm going, oh, well, I'm that persona, that linked with curiosity about having a point of view that I'm offering that you can discuss is very different. So that link with curiosity, I find is powerful. When somebody goes, well, tell me what your experience is. That's why I love design thinking. You know, you leave your ego and expertise at the door, start in there. So curiosity is key. How do you teach curiosity, though? How do you in your role?
So curiosity is one of those traits that if you're close enough to the person and can model it, it does rub off. One thing in our leadership peer groups, I'll give you an example of a man that was in the group, and he was very command and control. But I can usually see before I bring someone into the group that there's something other than that about them. And many leaders, you know, I mentioned how many females that rise in executive, at least back then, you know, maybe that's not as much so now, have taken on this persona that's not, you know, this hard shell. There are many in leadership positions of both genders who feel that others expect them, that it's a perception that as them at this position of authority, that they need to be the one that knows it all.
Yeah.
That pointing the direction means giving the detailed direction. Yeah. And like that. And so he was in this place, but I saw a lot more. He was also a very conservative person and so curious that I wasn't married, et cetera. So all of these things, you know, just
so judgmental with
and
it
wasn't
as well.
coming on to me at all, was just didn't understand a woman not needing a man to lead the household. And
this is me just head-butting the camera,
you know, such a dear person.
Yeah.
And you know, staying in that state, one, bringing someone that's so different than you into your circle, knowing you're going to be also coaching with them one-on-one, and seeing so much in them, you know, that you love about them, because I end up loving in the, you know, love as a person to person way, most of the people that I work with.
I find people generally just fascinating.
And
anyway.
It was so freeing for him, so freeing. And it's a pivot. So it's orchestrated over time. You don't just get up in front of your team if you've always been this way and then change your way and expect them to go, oh, now they're asking me how I feel. You know, I'm just going to open up to this person. You know, it doesn't
really.
It doesn't happen right away. The transformation was just amazing. And when he transformed, his business also really transformed from being burned by debt, being, he was exhausted because he was trying to control everything, to really delegating to others, bringing others up in succession, moving farther and farther away from being in the business to working, you know, on the business. And this is 20 million, he's probably 50, 60 million now. So not huge, but also not tiny.
Yeah.
And he just feels so free. I mean, we don't work together anymore, but he called me during the pandemic, and I hadn't heard from him for like 5 years. And he said, you know, Lori, I'm just driving here and I'm thinking about how wonderful it was. And I want to tell you what's happened from, you know, all that we did together. And that's, you know, how can I not do this, right?
No,
how can I not do it?
I think there's something in our work, though, that is nice about this, is that, and I want to say it callously, you don't really need to like the people. But if your passion and your drive, for me, is about, firstly, do they want to do the work? That's my first question. If they want to do the work and they see a change they need to make, great, come and work. And then for me, it's about the level they want to go to. And I always say outstanding only. You know, if you aim for good, you get average. If you aim for great, you get good. So I always say outstanding only. But there's a piece in there that their outstanding can be one person who's got the fear of standing up and speaking, which I have. Yeah. And it's a weird one, but doing keynotes and other things freaks me out. And I get so nervous before I do them. But everybody's outstanding is different. But I think there's something about releasing the human and releasing the fear and getting people to move forward. And I wanted to come to the book because it's a fascinating book. Pivot to Clarity is the title, but I want you to, rather than me putting in my words, tell me about it and what it's about, because there's a framework within there, yeah, that you talk about. But like all frameworks, it doesn't come to life until you tell the stories. So you can tell me a couple of stories and that'll bring this to life. Yeah.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And first, I should say The Pivot to Clarity is the second book after my first book called The Pivot, Orchestrating Extraordinary Business Momentum, where I introduce the term that I use, aligned momentum, which is where I've researched and experienced, and this is the state that I see organizations are in when they make those breakthroughs in performance. And it's hard to stay in that state. And we've seen some organizations that have broken through in performance and then they slip out of the state and maybe they come back into the state. But it's certainly worth, as you mentioned, excellence is certainly worth striving for. And as a leader, if you can always be orchestrating, okay, what do we need to do next? Where are we out of, where are we not being in this state of aligned momentum? Because if it's magical to be in that state. One of the first aligned momentum key indicators is clarity. So the very first start is you have to have a safe place. You have to have a safe place where people can step up, speak out. And in rule of thumb is that they know that their manager has their back and wants them to be successful.
Yeah.
If you don't have that, then really the other stages are not going to happen. In fact, even getting to clarity, having communication, the part where you're being clear with others, your message isn't going to land if no one feels safe. So clarity is a critical stage. It's also one of the aligned momentum key indicators. So it had to be the first next book. And you do not have to read the books in sequence. Just, there's this main big book, and then there will be 6, and I've only written one of those, purposefully airplane reads that hopefully hit both heads and hearts, which is what that's what helps inspire change, is when people feel it. And so clarity is, the book Pivot to Clarity is split into 2 parts. Most of my books will answer 2 questions. The 2 questions of Pivot to Clarity is, one is, how can I as a leader get clear for myself? And what does clear even mean when I'm getting clear for myself? Because it's pretty easy to say, okay, well, getting clear about something that just happens means getting to the crux of the matter. Yeah. But as leaders, we're the ones that must step into the future and set a direction based on that future. And you can't know the future. So the entire first part of my book is about, how do you get clear about the future, clear enough to set direction, and what is that fine line? Even what is too clear? What is, you're missing it. You're being incremental because you're getting way too far into the details, trying to know the future, and you can't.
What's your view on outcomes versus outputs? Because I'm always fascinated, because we're going through a strategy process at the moment. And we could argue that actually just getting to our income number at the end of this year, or profit number more particularly, to allow us to break even in the headwinds we've got at the moment in the markets, that's great success. But that's an outcome, and then you get outputs underneath it. So how do you operate with leaders when you're going through that clarity process?
That's an interesting question, and I'm gonna compare it to measure versus metric. So a measure is is usually a point of something, a unit of measure, a count of this, a percentage of this, etc. That's you're measuring that. A metric is a combination of those that provide you some meaningful direction, decision support, what we're talking about. I would say an output and an outcome is similar. And an output would be one component of what you're looking for in your outcome. An output is I want to say result, but so many people use outcome and result with the same. I mean, terminology is really tough. I would expand and say an outcome is both how it is affecting you in a larger sense. How people are doing, how you positioned yourself for a better future with that output.
I like that. It's interesting because somebody was talking about in the book analogy, and I'm going to get this wrong, but it was the principle of writing a book is a bit like driving from one side of the US to the other. And the analogy is the headlights. The headlights can only see a certain distance ahead, but it's enough to know whether you're on the right track, in the dark. And I do think sometimes that we struggle for clarity. And again, this is, getting yourself clear for something. The leader needs to know everything about everything. And people are saying, so what will it look like in February 24 when we get to the end of this journey? And therefore, it's a difference between a sense of direction, isn't it? That you're going versus a finite, this is exactly what we're going to have,
And when you say that, which feels inspiring?
Well, for me, the sense of direction, because it gives freedom to the team. Yeah.
So what does a leader want to do? I mean, what I hope of the leader, and I'm saying not just saying someone in a position of authority, but I would hope a leader, someone who's wanting to bring others along for a better future with brilliant execution, then you want to be inspiring because you don't want to always be pushing.
Yeah.
So just if we could, when we go into our strategic planning sessions, just remind ourselves of that. I mean, we're not going to always be, wow, everybody's super engaged by this, and what's inspiring to you might not be inspiring to others. And I can assure you, if you just say, oh, wait, we're not going to know the detail of how people's work's done, so let's ask them what progress looks to them, is a step in the right direction.
Yeah. It's interesting. We're going on a journey to B Corporation. So I want to get the second question on the board. The B Corporation is my vision. I want to make an impact in society. This is me as the owner of the business going, yay, this is what we're going to do. Come on. But I had that moment looking around the room and going, is everybody bought into this? And everybody's going, yeah, bought into it. But it's that question when it says, so how does it mean to you? And we went through an exercise with projects around ESG and other things where I started to realize that you've got to take people on a journey to understand your story. So I presume the second question, once you've got yourself clear as a leader, is to move to how you're going to get them clear about the journey, even for that planning piece, because they could be heading south rather than across the country in terms of their understanding of what you're doing. But that for me is the difficult thing about being a leader. We're supposed to have all the answers, supposed to have the direction. We buy a team and then they might have 6 different versions of that direction they want to go in. Yeah.
It's true. I say that even your best people will do what you expect, and it may not be at all what you want. And we have all had that happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's us. It's how we're communicating and how we're giving those that are closer to the teams, usually called a manager, how we're giving them the time to become better communicators. So the next part of the book is about being clear for others in a way that the message lands for them. And if you're understanding what it feels for you to get clear, and then you are striving for that point where they actually are at that getting clear of what you're communicating, then that's golden, right? You want them to feel it. You want, when you as a leader have something that inspires you, and I don't know if being a B Corp did this for you, but when it's a yes, I mean, it's like the hairs rise up on your arms.
Yeah.
It's just, yes, this is it. And you want them to get there.
Yeah.
That's where you want them. That's commitment. That's not just, okay, buy in. I understand why the company, they're justifying it in their heads. Oh, well, if I was the owner, I guess I would want that too. Okay, I work for the company, so I better do this. It's better than, it's a little bit better than compliance. It's buy-in. Cotter, who is a wonderful professor, has written a book on buy-in. I'm not saying it's not important, because sometimes that's the best you can get, but commitment is what is going to allow you to have that breakthrough performance. Commitment is part of being in a state of aligned momentum, where others are empowered and understand what their role is in that direction, and not only what their role is, but how they themselves fit their role. And it's all aligned. And then they can make the changes. They can tell you what needs to change in their role. And back to curiosity. I mean, I've been really, really good at getting this kind of quick growth out of organizations. Like when I mentioned when I worked in healthcare, and people would tell me, this is how my job has to change. And the leaders of those in authority, I'm going to say, the organization, were not getting that from them. And the consultants that might have gone in, and I'm a consultant too, I'm saying that there's one, I recommend all consultants try their hand at some coaching, because it really makes you you're going to help your clients a lot more.
I was just about to say,
because you'll help them make it through them.
I think it's that borrow your watch, tell you the time, and sell you the watch back was the version of consultancy that I first came into. And it's interesting because we used to joke with my friends who were lawyers that we were very close to the bottom of the ocean, bottom feeders and lower, and who was the lowest of the low. But I think coaching for me releases a lot of that, and design thinking does, because you're getting in, as Brené Brown talks about, you're getting into the arena with them and starting to say, so what does it look like down here? What's your direction? So coaching is a fundamental principle, as well as curiosity underneath the work you do, I'm hearing. Yeah.
Yes. So managers having the skills to be coaches is one of the aligned momentum key indicators. And just some rules of thumb: if you've promoted someone to be a manager and they're an expert, but they care about people and they like the idea of building teams, then give them the time to do that. If you've put someone in a position who really doesn't like people, then they should not be in a position that influences others' careers.
Yeah.
You need to have an advancement track if you want to keep them.
It's interesting also in that, because there's the player-coach mentality. I see it more and more in businesses where more people direct reports. You're given your own individual targets, then plus you're being asked to coach and lead people. And I presume that comes into the play about the pivot and how you get people to coach as well.
I love that you said plus, and it's one of the reasons I say give the time. Yeah. When I was a manager, man, there are so many things I would have done differently. I would have insisted on carving out time during their normal work days, during my normal work day, to actually do leadership. And it wasn't afforded me. Your mini managers are part of the work, and that's okay. We just need to give the time. They're in overwhelm. You add coaching, and it really, you're telling them what to do, is one of the reasons, and I'm not trying to promote my software, is one of the reasons why I also built a new software that helps managers lead better. Because if leaders can say, yeah, we want our managers to lead better, and give them this system where it makes it continuous and makes it easy for them to do, it just becomes part of the day, then they're not spending that mind space kicking themselves going, oh, but I was supposed to have a coaching session with this person and I haven't yet. Or, oh my goodness, I need to do a performance review. Now this person really needs to be let go, but I don't have any performance reviews. All that stuff that happens when we only focus on managing work or somehow expect we manage people. Ha ha.
And it's, for me, when it comes down to it, there's so many tools, softwares, but it's also some of the, what I would call habit-based work, like Michael Bungay-Staniers, the coaching habit, how to coach in 10 minutes or less. A lot of this, people say,
Right.
well, this seems very functional, tactical, but actually for busy people to have the habit structure or stacking of habits around things, like even just a simple, I always love it. The first question is, what's on your mind? But that says it's your agenda. Yeah, it says, I'm interested in what you've got in your mind, and therefore I'm passing it over to you. The accountability piece goes in there. So it is about getting these small accountability habits, coaching habits in there that are important in
Yes,
what you do.
and being aware of what a manager's and a manager could be at any level, right? Even the top leadership team, anyone who is influencing the success of any other person
Yep.
is, I mean, you could call it whatever you call it. I'm just calling that person a manager.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's so important. You need to give the time. It's similar. You mentioned writing a book. So when I have, like, I'm doing this call, maybe I have some administrative work to do, I am not creating. I mean, I can't. And if I had 10 minutes in between, I mean, after this, I have, an offsite with someone. I can't just pencil in 10 minutes to write something in my book. If it was an instructive book, just a brain dump, maybe. But no, I cannot create in that time. So why would we expect a manager in 10 minutes to shed all of the emergencies that are on their plate to have an authentic conversation with someone to ask that question you just asked?
Yeah.
So we need to find a way to, again, this is all part of that, the communication and having it landing, and empathy. We need to understand what the day of the person that we're wanting to do something differently, what their day is like.
And I'm aware of our time, and we could talk on this for ages. And if I look at the structures, so we've talked about coaching, but you've got other principles in talent, adaptability, mastery mindset, nimble decision making. We could go on and on. And one of the fascinating things about this topic is when you strip it down, we've talked about curiosity, we talked about coaching, and we've talked about doing your own work as a leader and as an individual to sit back. And we talked about the space and time to do that. And so I'm going to ask you the question, if you were to say to a leader listening to this 40-minute conversation we've had so far, what are the core principles out of everything you do that if they only had time to do two, what would they be? What would it be?
Oh, that's a really good question. Practice curiosity, because it's likely going to tick off. I mean, if you like managing and being productive and ticking off boxes, it's likely going to help you with empathy and listening and
Yep.
Gaining commitment and so many things that are probably on your list. Just call it curiosity and start practicing it. And what I do in the group, because we go through decision support and we go through a process where you have to ask questions of someone who's asking for decision support to make sure that you are on the same page with them before you give solutions. Okay. So it trains us to even if we are thinking of it in our heads as a statement, just start there. How would I make that a question? Just practice that. So curiosity. And the other is, well, I'm just going to list, if you don't mind, I'm going to list three because these are what I look for, the characteristics I look for leaders who will come into one of my peer groups. Curiosity is one of them. And I call that someone who knows a lot and is not a know-it-all.
Yep, good, like it.
And no know-it-alls make it into the group.
Yep.
Courage, and then you mentioned Brene Brown. Courage absolutely includes being vulnerable. If you're going to create a safe place, if you're expecting others to be safe, then you also need to show vulnerability.
Love it.
And the last one is tenacity. So if you are seeing this vision, you're in awe, you're inspired by that, have what it takes to get through. Keep going. That pivot is not fast.
Yeah. I think this is where, the tenacity piece is a fascinating one for me, because I do believe that people think, what are the top 5 things I need to do? Right, I've done them, but it hasn't made the difference. And what we're talking about is layering habits every day. So tenacity is it's about almost becomes habitual, so you don't think about it to get to that, rather than having a checklist against that. So it's interesting that tenacity is something we turn on, turn off, but actually tenacity for me is an infinite mindset of daily practices and habits. Yeah.
Especially for a leader and for what I'm asking of managers, because doing some of these new things, really practicing leadership and not always moving into management, doesn't check off boxes like you like.
Yeah.
It is a practice in patience and being about others.
Yeah.
And giving yourself time to just have some blank space. And those are things that for many of us, we high achievers,
Yep.
actually takes tenacity to do.
Yeah. It's fascinating for me, because I had this dilemma the other day about whether my drive to get habits in place, to have the right energy and purposeful, inspired energy and resilient is driven by a driven achiever piece about, getting it right, or whether it's about getting the energy into the system. And I find sometimes my competitive edge gets to it, and that gets in the way of curiosity. It gets in the way of taking time and space. It's fascinating. We could talk for ages, Laurie, and I know we could, but I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I'm fascinated by your answers on here. So 3 questions. The first one is just one small moment in your life that has had a big impact on your leadership, a scenario, something that happened that's changed the way you lead. What would it be?
This seems so like a broken record, but becoming more curious has been a major, being curious of why I do what I do was critical for being able to pivot. Being curious about others helps me lead in times that are very trying. So learning curiosity, and I grew up someone who it was not okay to ask questions.
Okay.
You don't question authority. So I say this almost like, oh, well, this is so easy, just ask questions. It was a significant thing for me to do.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I relate to that. My grandfather was a professor, and it was in those days, it was children seen but not heard. Yeah, so asking questions, curious. When I discovered this older person, I was willing to ask questions. I fought in the First World War, and I was able to sit at his feet and listen to what he'd done. And those are the people who were attracting me at those days, to have the curiosity. Fascinating. Okay, second question. If you had to disrupt the one thing in leaders today, what would it be?
Look at where you're managing. It's probably over 80%, and see where you could replace that with better leadership.
Interesting. And just to define what you'd see the difference in there, what's the difference between managing and leadership?
Management is managing work.
Okay.
Leading is building up people and bringing them with you.
Love it. Very good. Simple. Can I borrow that? Yeah, I'll take that. That's
yes,
good.
You may.
Final one. One leadership habit that's non-negotiable for you, specifically, that you hold true. The habit you
Kindness.
do. Kindness.
Kindness. Always be kind. And I don't mean nice. I don't mean always trying to please. I mean being kind. It doesn't matter where they are in the organization. It doesn't matter what state they're in. Be kind.
No, I love that. Somebody once said to me, Colin, you need to be more careful, which I rebelled against. And they said, let me frame it around, full of care. How are you full of care? And I love that that's my definition of kindness. How can I be full of care to somebody as I go through?
I love that too.
It's good. Laurie, fascinating to get to talk to you and explore a bit more. And but if people want to find out a bit more or get in contact with you, how would they find you?
The easiest way is how I call myself, the Pivot Catalyst. So if you search for the Pivot Catalyst, you're going to find my website, thepivotcatalyst.com. You'll likely find my books, Pivot to Clarity. The books are under the pivotbook.com. And you'll find my social handles at Pivot Catalyst. So just anybody can spell those. Just remember those and you will find me.
Amazing. It's a delight to have you on. Good luck with the next book, and I'm sure we'll be speaking at some point in the near future. But thank you, Lori, for taking the time to be on.
It was wonderful to talk with you today, Colin. Thank you.
My pleasure. Great conversation with Lori there. I mean, for me, one of the things I'm always aware of is that leadership as a subject is massive. And where do you start? And even when I was writing my book and, I look at the feedback I've had in the book, it's been good. But actually, one of the things is it's such a lot of information, a lot of things to get across to people. And therefore, for me, it's about breaking these things down. And Lori obviously talked about how she's writing the books and the series of books to almost make it bite-sized chunks to take on. So I love that she's doing that. And I love the concepts of pivoting and talking about pivot as a significant thing. We always say, they didn't pivot well enough. They should have pivoted. But actually to pivot a business and a structure that's significant, it's difficult. And I know that from my own experience. To bring people along is even more difficult to do that. So through the power of the will of the leader is one way, but that's not sustainable. So how do you do that and how do you structure it? And I love the concept also about the decision support that you used in there, because there's a piece about coaching I get, and coaching for me is one of the most powerful skills you can use as a leader. But having your advisory board, your decision support, and being able to get those people trained so they ask the right questions as your decision support, so that then you can mutually come up with some decisions, some support, some ideas about how you're going is critical to that. And it's a skill, it's a process, it's a habitual piece to get you into a flow as a leader, to be able to adjust to what you have to adjust to in the markets. And at the moment, we're sitting in a market that is very volatile. So therefore, the agility of people to pivot is so massively important at the moment. So hopefully you enjoyed that. And I look forward to welcoming you into another episode of the Leadership Tales podcast very shortly.